If you're a young family or you know a young family, today's episode is just fantastic because it's chock full of basically everything a young family should be looking at for their own situation, whether it be how their accounts are set up, their retirement plans, education, FSA. We're going to touch on a little bit of everything today for this young family example. Now, in general, when we're looking at Tim and Allie Carolina and their young family, overall, this is just the most interesting piece for me to look at. I just get so energized when I'm working with young families because they have so much potential. There's so much time between now and way down the road, whether it be retirement or some of their other goals. There's just so much to work on and so much opportunity. So going through Tim and Allie's situation here, just as a starter, you can see how their net worth is broken up into just a great variety of different items. They've done a great job saving for themselves so far to this point in time. So we'll start out on the top here with their emergency fund, which very well may be sufficient. They have two different types of accounts for their kids here and their checking. So I'm going to circle back to these, but notice that they are putting money away for their kids now at this point. Then right here, they have their joint TOD account. That's their buffer bucket. That's kind of their flexible account where they can use that money, whether that be for an early retirement, for education, for home renovations. It's your flexible account that can kind of do anything that you want it to do. It's invested, and that gives it that opportunity to grow much more so than in a bank, but you still have full access to it, unlike these retirement accounts to follow. So if you've watched these videos before, a flexible account, especially for young families, can be particularly important. Next, going on to the more traditional retirement accounts, you see Allie has a 401k, Tim has a 401k, and then they both have IRAs as well. So the 401ks are their work retirement plans. The IRAs are their individual or personal retirement plans outside of that. So for the 401k side of it, you can see it says target date fund. If you have a 401k at work, you probably, when you go through the investment options, see different investments that have a date at the end. That date is when the account gets more and more conservative. So if you say 2060, it's set up to be more aggressive now. And then when you get closer to 2060, it gets more and more conservative because it says that's when you're going to retire and need the funds. Now, that's not 100% ideal because even when you retire, you may not necessarily need that bucket of money right away. At the same time, it's better probably for most people that don't really know what they're doing when it comes to managing their own investments to just have that target date fund that's going to have a bunch of pieces spread out. It's going to have a professional manager on it. That's most likely the best option for your 401k if you're not a professional yourself. Going down further here, Tim has the same thing. You can see a target date fund. So one of the things initially I would have a conversation in this situation would be, hey, are you maxing out your 401ks? Are you putting in enough money to get the free money from the employer? Because when you're looking at the order for best kind of money, free money is always the best. So we want to make sure we're always taking advantage of that. Next on the list here, I'm going to jump down over the HSAs temporarily, go to the Roth IRAs. So the Roth IRAs grow tax-free. If Tim or Allie had a Roth 401k, that would also grow tax-free. Anytime you hear Roth, it means tax-free. So that money is growing tax-free for them in their Roth IRAs. And a question for them might be, hey, do you have a Roth 401k? May or may not be appropriate depending on what their tax situation is, but definitely something, again, you should be asking and going through and looking through for your own situation. So just kind of pausing right there, if you look at your own situation, do you know how much you have in your bank account? Do you know if you have a flexible investment account that can kind of grow with whatever your needs might be or unforeseen changes might be down the road? Do you have a 401k? If so, are you getting the whole matching amount? Do you know if you're putting it into the regular 401k or the Roth 401k? So all great points for a young family to really be looking at already so far here. Next piece here, the HSAs. This has to do with HSAs, FSAs. These are savings types of accounts that have special rules when they're used for healthcare, childcare, or kind of some other stuff as well. So when you're looking at FSA here for dependent care, that means if Allie puts money into this, she gets a tax deduction for the amount put in. So she puts in $2,000 into her dependent care FSA. She can now use that $2,000 to pay for daycare, and it has that tax advantage status. She's getting that tax deduction for it off the top. So that's fantastic. Same thing with this limited purpose FSA. It might be for dental, for other medical expenses. The only drawback on FSAs is that you have to use the money by the end of the year. Otherwise, it generally goes away, disappears on you. Do you want to fund the FSAs if you're going to use the money? Daycare is a great example. You pretty much know what your daycare expenses are going to be. However, you don't want to be overfunding them as well if you may not use the funds. An HSA, which is falling under this category here, but they don't specifically have, an HSA has more flexibility. You put money into an HSA, it can grow tax deferred again. And if you use it for medical expenses, it's tax free. And if you don't use it all, that's fine. you can use it in subsequent years. So it kind of grows and builds on itself. So an HSA is a really, really great resource, which they don't specifically have or they're not using, but that would be a great question for them as well. So for your own situation, do you have FSAs through work? Do you have HSA options through work? Because those could very well be additional pieces that could be an advantage to you. Jumping back up now to the last piece here, the children's accounts. So you see they each have 5,000 and they're in these checking accounts. Now, if you have money from birthdays or other things for kids, it's common to open up a checking account or a savings account and put that money in. But think about when you're going to need the money. If you're not going to use this money for, say, 18 years, is a bank account really the most appropriate place for it to be? There are certainly other investment options that could possibly make more sense, whether that be a 529 plan that grows tax-free for education purposes, or even an account in this taxable investment section where it can now, again, grow or have a greater opportunity for growth if it's sitting in, in that kind of a bucket where it's invested and not just sitting in the bank. So things to think about, don't just default at putting all your kids' money in the bank. Is there a better option based on the goals for when you're going to use the money and what you expect to use the money for? So all really great points here. You can see overall their total assets are about $1 million. So about half of their net worth, or if we jump up here, about 40% is in their home. Again, you always want to be aware of how much of my asset pool is in my net worth, in my home, how much is tied into there. Because when you're looking at your home, if you don't plan on selling it, then all of that money is kind of tied up, right? It's not liquid if it's tied up in your home. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that. That's why a lot of people downsize at retirement. It's not just to lower their expenses. A lot of times it's also to free up that equity in your home. If you're in $1 million home and you downsize to a $700,000 home, you could free up, say, $300,000 in equity now to help actually fund your retirement. You always want to pay attention to that. Jumping now down to the liabilities, you see they have a number of a couple relatively small liabilities here for a total net worth of $861. Net worth doesn't matter too much as far as what the total end number is. It's more how's this coming together for you and your situation. Going on then to the planning piece of it, where we can really dive down into, hey, if we were working one-on-one with Tim and Allie, what are some of the things that we could be looking for? One of the things that we could be looking for are supercharging opportunities for your finances. So a big one for a lot of young families is daycare. Daycare can be a really, really big expense, right? If you have 1, 2 children in daycare, they could be $500 a month, $1,000, $2,000. It could be a pretty significant amount based on where you are in the country. Big question for people is, what are you planning on doing with that money after daycare is over? For a lot of people that we work with, that money just tends to disappear. If that money disappears, then it turns into an expense. So any money that is there goes to one or two different things. One is it can be saved, and if that money is saved when daycare stops, that's great. You have more money that's building up for you in the future. Two, the second advantage for you there is that your living expenses remain the way they are. They stay lower, because if you're saving that money now, you don't need to replace that money in retirement. It's two things for you. Now let's say the reverse is true. Let's say that those daycare funds, they stop daycare and it kind of just disappears, because if you don't pay attention to it, it could very well just disappear on you. That means now you're living on more, right? Your base living expenses are increasing because now the daycare expense that ended, it didn't get saved. Now we're saying it gets spent. So that's more money down the road we're going to have to replace for living expenses. And number two, if you're living on it, you're not saving it. So that's less that's going to be building up as well. So it's either two things for you or two things against you. So in an advanced planning situation here, we can look at, hey, what additional flexibility does this kind of allow us to present to ourselves and our situation for whatever goals that we might have. So if they do what we would hope they did and save those funds post daycare, you could see down the road that it's going to have more in the way of opportunities. So it's just starting off here, the secure income. So the two Social Securities, you can see it's above this initial expense line. You see you have a nice gap here in what you might have to pay when it comes to taxes, because if you're putting money into that flexible account, say daycare funds are going into that flexible investment account, that is the first place you're most likely going to withdraw from in retirement. You will not have to jump into your IRAs right away, which is more tax efficient for you. So that's why you see those tax brackets drop really low here. You also have money to be able to pay for college. So you see this bump up in expenses here. That's because we're putting more money away, and now they have more to be able to draw from for those education expenses. They might even be able to expand what they're doing. So maybe they can go on more vacations. Maybe they can even retire early. So all of these things now become more likely to be possible if they're taking advantage of this kind of financial supercharging opportunity when daycare ends. Let's say, though, that the reverse is true. Let's say instead of doing what we'd ideally want them to do, let's say that they just keep spending those daycare funds. Okay, now when that happens, we're going to have less flexibility down the road. You see this line is higher here compared to the secure income. This gap is less. And now if we try to turn on some of these things like the vacation, like the early retirement, you're going to see how these numbers jump up much more significantly. Lines kind of over the secure income. There's virtually no gap here. So you're going to have much less in the way of flexibility. Very last thing, I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at everybody today. Last thing is on life insurance. If you have young kids, especially, you really need to make sure you're paying attention to life insurance. And this can be both through outside of work and through your employer. Ideally, you want your insurance to be outside of your employer because you can always maintain control of it then, right? Even if you change jobs, your insurance is always going to stay with you. But you want to make sure you're at least looking at what you have. So here, Tim has 825, Allie has 1 million. Is that enough? Does that make sense based on what they're earning? So, just jumping in here, if, I look at this level of insurance, I would expect Allie to be earning more money than Tim here because she has more insurance coverage, right? So we want to make sure we're looking at these things. We want to make sure that we're putting it all together so that we are taking advantage of these supercharging opportunities. If we do the right thing when we're young, it gives us just way more flexibility down the road to enjoy life as much as we can. Thanks very much, and more plan shares to come.